I'm Lainey Jennings Hall, and you're listening to Speak Up Arkansas on KABS 88.3 FM. Disability Rights Arkansas is proud to be a part of KABF's weekly Speak Up Arkansas program to encourage dialogue about the issues that matter most to people with disabilities, their families and caregivers, and to educate the public about these issues to make Arkansas a truly inclusive state where everyone's personhood and contributions are valued. The show is pre-recorded, so we won't be taking calls, but we always welcome your questions and comments. Give us a call at 800-482-1174, or you can find us online at disabilityrightsar.org. We're also on Facebook at Disability Rights AR, and you'll find us on Twitter at DR Arkansas. Today I'm here with my co-host, Allie Tomlinson, with Arkansas Alliance for Disability Advocacy. We are joined by Senator Joyce Elliott with Get Loud Arkansas, as well as Rebecca Zimmerman from Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. We are going to dive into voting, barriers to voting, and really discuss why voting in every single election is important. Thank you for joining us here today. Let's talk a little bit about you guys and what you do. Senator Elliott?
Yeah, I'm Joyce Elliott, and I was a public school teacher for 30 years and absolutely loved it. It was the thing I wanted to do with my life. And but I got into politics, which was the other thing I wanted to do with my life. There was never a time that I thought politics was not a worthy endeavor, never. And I wanted to be a politician, and as I wanted to be a teacher. I am not one of those people who says, I am not a politician. I am. It is up to me to make sure I'm a good one and I'm doing the things I should do by people. So currently I'm in the state Senate. I'm about to be term limited at the end of, well, technically when the session is convened on the second Monday in January 2023. And currently I am doing something else I really want to do with my life. I'm the executive director of Get Loud Arkansas, which is a 501(c) group whose mission is to register, engage folks in civic responsibility type of work, and get them all the way to the polls, mobilize them to the polls. Because one thing we have learned is, for sure, just registering people is not enough, but to get them to the polls. So all in all, I'm the sum of a person who's gotten to do exactly what she wants to do with her life 3 times. I don't take that for granted. I think that's a phenomenal privilege for me to have this opportunity. And thank you guys for inviting me today.
Yes, thank you so much, Joyce. Rebecca, you want to talk a little bit about what you do as well?
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm Rebecca Zimmerman. I'm the Community Engagement Director at Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, and we lobby for laws at the state capitol that would improve the lives of kids and families in the state and advance racial equity, and lobby against laws that we think would be harmful for children and families in our state. And we work on a wide range of issues: education, healthcare, family economic well-being, immigrant families, racial equity. And one new thing that we've started working on in the past few years with our partners is around voting rights as well. So happy to be here today with Senator Elliott.
I just want to say to you two about Advocates for Children and Families, because I cannot tell you in my work as a state senator how indispensable the work of Advocates for Children and Families have just been great for me, for resources and helping me find ways forward when seemed like there was no way forward. So I just want to just give a shout out to Advocates for Children and Families, because it's mattered to me in being able to do my work to be a good politician. So thanks, Rebecca.
We've been really proud to work with Senator Elliott over the years on a range of issues of kids and families, and sometimes she's been the only one advocating on a specific issue for kids and families, and she knows that, but she does it anyway. So we really appreciated working with her over the years.
I do think it is important that, we have these organizations and these resources that we can all share and band together to get that information out there, because it's a fight.
It is.
So we've got a big topic today. We are here talking about voting, voting accessibility, and why it's important to vote in every election, because everyone, talks about the big general election, but there is so much more that impacts your daily life. I want to start out just with a little bit of history in voting because while it has come a long way, not everyone can still vote. So back in the 1800s, it was just the landowning white men. And in 1869, black men were allowed to vote with the 15th Amendment, but there were poll taxes, literacy tests, and other measures just meant to discourage voting. 1920, which not that long ago, women were allowed to vote. You would think that all these things are so far in the past, but I mean that is not that long. I know my grandmother was alive at that point, and so that's just crazy for me to think about. In 1964, the poll tax was eliminated, so that did open it up for a few more voters. 65, the Voting Rights Act was there, and then 71, the voting age was lowered to 18.
I want to say that, 1971, that didn't stop the oppression of voters, especially here in Arkansas. The Arkansas General Assembly actually passed a law in 2001 that stated if you are someone that has guardianship taken over you, you are not allowed to vote any longer. You actually have to go back to a judge, go through court again, and have your voting rights actually given back to you. So, you listed off a lot of individuals who were stopped from voting that had to really fight for their rights to be able to go through their civic duty, to really have their power be heard that they had all the time, but people were trying to hold them down. And it's still actually happening today on so many different levels, especially here in Arkansas.
I think one other historical voting suppression issue that you didn't mention but still in play today is actually a Jim Crow era law that a lot of states have adopted and still impacts a lot of people today, is blocking people with felony convictions from voting. And that really disproportionately impacts Black Americans particularly by a huge margin and keeps them from voting. And in some states, they might not be able to vote at all. In states like Arkansas, they can go through a process where they can apply to get their voting rights back, but they have to make sure all their fines and fees are paid for. And some people consider that and said that is a modern form of poll tax there. So that's one important issue I think impacts a lot of people that we don't hear as much about.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, Rebecca, too, the notion that, poll taxes were just in your face when you actually had to go and buy this little piece of paper. I remember hearing older people when I was growing up talking about poll taxes, and I had no idea what they were talking about, but I knew it was something frightening, and they whispered and all that, and I was always snaking along the front porch trying to figure out what they were talking about because they were obviously afraid. But the other thing that happens with folks today, they will get out of prison, and some people have a probationary period so long they will not live to even satisfy that probationary period. And so that means, of course, they will never get to vote, although they have paid their dues. And I think that's a sad commentary how history still intersects into reality today. And another little quick thing, in 1920, of course, when women got the right to vote, I could think about 1920 and then when the Civil Rights Act was passed. That meant all that time period, if you were a Black woman, you probably were not voting because the suppression was there to make sure you did not vote. And there was a lot of consternation between Black and white women because so many white women, the whole notion of this includes everybody was not there in the way we tend to think. So when we say women got the right to vote in 1920, I'm always so reminded of that very crushing caveat that, well, kind of, that Black women generally had to wait till the Voting Rights Act was passed simply because they were Black before there was any kind of enforcement. But We're voting now. We're the biggest voting bloc. We were the most dependable voting bloc there is, Black women. So the most dependable. Don't turn us loose.
Well, okay. We're talking about, some different inabilities to be able to vote. Let's keep on this vein. Why aren't people voting? I know specifically people with disabilities, there's a lot of accessibility issues still today in a lot of the polling places. One of our staff members that goes around and monitors polls, and continuously they find accessibility issues. I know just recently the ID requirement, that the law that was passed.
The voter ID law that was just passed, what barriers can that cause an individual when actually going to the ballot box?
Well, it doesn't. For many people who come from a legacy of folks voting and not even thinking about that was any issue for them, and people who have been used to having an ID, all their lives. The thing that was good about Arkansas, the thing that was good about Arkansas law is that it was really such a communal thing. And you showed up at the polls, there were people there that they knew who you were. And that's still the case now. We can get people to work at the polls, which is getting harder. But most people think it would not create a problem for folks. But it's just one more step to make it something else somebody has to do to be prepared to vote. To me, that is the most outstanding thing. And people will say, well, it's not a problem. You can get a free ID. Well, yeah, maybe you can if you have transportation to go somewhere to get a free ID. And for some people, because they have just not kept up what's going on, and they don't even know they're supposed to have an ID. And somebody might think, well, how do they not know that? Because perhaps maybe the last time they voted, they didn't have to have an ID, because there are years between the last time they voted here and now. Arkansas does a really good job of making it difficult to vote. So when this law was passed, I was in the Senate when the law was passed about the voter ID, and it was referred, to be amended into the Constitution. I kept asking, why is this even a problem? What problem are we solving? Because in the legislature, you should at least be trying to solve a problem. I just think that the purpose of government should be to make it easier for people to vote, not throw up one other roadblock. And the voter ID thing was simply a roadblock. There was no indication that we had any problems. It was just not a problem. But I think it's pretty clear that people who advanced that bill knew exactly what it was going to do. And I don't pretend there was some kind of laudable motivation behind this. It was not. It was a tactic they knew would work.
I definitely can agree with you on so many things there. I mean, obviously all of them, especially trying to aid individuals in the disability community and getting registered and being able to get to the ballot box and use their power. It just adds another layer of logistical barriers from here to go and get that, that ID to meet those requirements, whether it be transportation, whether it be the cost of actually getting that ID, whatever it is. And then having to make it to the actual polls. Like, we know how hard it is for individuals with disabilities to be able to do it in the first place. We know that there's actual data showing that. And then to add a layer of logistical requirements, it is troublesome to know that we're making it harder for people to actually use their power.
And I think with a lot of these laws, if you look at them individually, like Senator Elliott was saying, like, people think it's not that big a deal, but intent matters and results matter. What the impact of the law has matters. And the voter ID laws are relatively new in our democracy. These only happened in the past couple of decades. Last session, they passed a law where you couldn't sign a sworn affidavit to your to prove your identity. You had to have that ID, and that did add an additional barrier, obviously, for a lot of people. And it is harder to get around to the county offices. And that if you live in rural areas, there's not public transportation for people with disabilities, like you mentioned. That's even harder, the elderly and others. But they made it also harder to vote absentee, because not only do you have to show a copy of your driver's license or your identification card, they also added a signature matching requirement and your signature on your voter absentee ballot application has to match the signature that you provided for your voter registration. And over time, people's signatures can change. I first registered to vote when I was 18. I probably put a heart over the I in my name. And then, but elderly people with disabilities, particularly their signature can look different at different times. And if you're just basing it on that and throwing away someone's ballot, that's totally, especially if you're already requiring that they share their photo ID. Why do we have this law? I think you need to ask that when you're considering these sorts of things.
People are very hesitant to send copies of their photo ID, and I get it, because they're thinking this could be open for so much abuse. But I'll just say real quickly, the same thing happened in the legislature with this law, where your signatures are supposed to match and that kind of thing. We talked about, well, who is going to be making that determination? We don't have handwriting experts, at the end of that line to say, to determine whether or not this is the same signature. And it is the same signature, but it might look very different. And just so happened, I was at the Capitol working, later than I should have been one night, and I came out. It was dark, but I stepped on something and I fell so hard, because when you have a totally unexpected fall, and I was going backward. But so my whole thing came to be, I've got to make myself fall forward. And I did. I was like a bird flying, my arms flapping just so I could go forward. But when I did, I fell full force. First time I've ever had a pancake fall, because I stepped on something that rolled. My hand was injured. My signature will never be the same because of that one thing. And that's not anything unique to me. People have issues all the time, in addition to their handwriting just changing. But my signature is different. I shared that. I said, I can't fix that. I've had surgery on this hand. It's still different. Why should we do this to people? And basically it boiled down because, they're the votes to do it. And it's just totally unfair.
That's such a good point. I mean, I developed rheumatoid arthritis over the last few, and just in the last few years, my handwriting it looks like chicken scratch at this point. But it absolutely has changed, since I was 18.
Right.
We had the opportunity to meet with 3 blind individuals at our last Advocacy Takes Action Walk Vote, and they really did a great job educating us on the fact that they've never seen their signature. They don't know what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely no way for them to try to match it to, the first time that they registered. And so that's something that not a lot of individuals think about. It was just a robust amount of information from them and their experience in voting and what those signatures law have brought to the table for them. So,
which, when you say it just as clear cut as you did, like trying to match your signature, you almost hear how kind of crazy it sounds.
Really, yes. And I tell you, a lot of people now, one of the reasons people don't bother with the process, we have a lot of people in our state who are literate, but not literate enough to engage in the process of either registration and getting that done and going to the polls and doing all the things they need to do. And there are several of them are not old people. They're younger people. And people have learned how to, know how to make it by being good verbal communicators and being watchful beyond anything I would ever imagine, to know what to do and at certain times, and you come back to now, even with the GPS, you've got to know how to put the destination into the thing. And that's not even anything remotely as important to me as voting, but they suffer that anxiety, and nobody wants to be embarrassed. And we just should think about accommodating for things that are just not our experience. And that's where the problem is, not seeing ourselves and other people when we make these laws and these rules and regulations. For the life of me, I don't understand why we aren't doing everything the opposite, everything we can to make voting easy. But I know suppression, is that is the trademark thing that's going on right now. And we know what that's about as well. Certain people shouldn't vote in some people's minds.
I was thinking about that, Senator Elliott, when I got emailed about this conversation. They passed the law at the General Assembly last session that you can't give water bottles and things like that to people standing in line. And I was thinking about Australia and them voting there. People are required to vote in Australia. They can pay just a small fine not to vote, but basically everyone chooses to vote, even though the fine is so small. But everyone gets like hot dogs when they're standing in line, and it's like a big celebration when they go to vote. Yeah, like when you go to vote, you're waiting in line, you get a hot dog, and that's just normal there. And so we can't even hand people water bottles when they're voting. It's a very different culture. Like Senator Elliott was saying, we put so many restrictions on voting in this country and in this state. I was watching The Daily Show. They had it's someone from Australia speaking about this, and our concept of democracy, she said, was very far from what she considered democracy in terms of voting rights.
I happen to have a really good friend. I'm going to be on a Zoom with him this afternoon, in fact, who is from Australia. And he was here in the States. We serve on an international board together. He was here in the States when it was time for a vote in Australia. And it was, I think, a week or two out or something like that. And he just panicked because he was not going to be getting back home to vote. And it was, he was trying to figure out a way to be sure his ballot got there in time because he knew he was going to have a fine. He wanted to vote. But the thing that he kept talking about, there is a fine if I don't vote. And he's saying, I want to vote, but I will get this done. And I think he did get it done. But he said that the fine was substantial enough that people paid attention to it because they just didn't want to pay because they had not done their civic duty. And I just thought, it's so opposite here. We spend a great deal of money to make sure you don't vote. It is really quite opposite.
You know, we've really gone over a lot of things that have changed here, a lot of the barriers to voting, but I just really want to ask about the different types of elections and why it's important in being involved in all of them. So in 2020, 62% of Americans with disabilities, the data that came in from the Bureau, they cast in the presidential election, it was 62% of Americans with disabilities, and that's compared to their 50% in 2016. So those numbers are big. You know, why should we be seeing those numbers, if not more, in our local elections, in our state elections? Can we just talk about that and the importance of all the elections?
Well, I always talk to people about the thing that affects you on a daily basis more than anything else. Those decisions that are made right where you live, called the local elections, right where you live on a daily basis. When you think about, for example, I'd just say start with the school board. Everybody goes to school somewhere. If you go to a public school, and in almost every hamlet or nearby hamlet in the state, there is a public school. And there are children going to those schools. That's about as local as it can get. And people pay very little or no attention to school boards, to school board elections. And we really should. Because we're at a very pivotal time now, for example, in public education. We have, all the issues of people talking about critical race theory being taught in schools where it's not. But we will put people on a school board with that kind of thinking who's not bothered to understand, you are running on a false premise here. This is not even true. And we just simply need good people on the school board who really care enough about doing the right thing by all of our kids. That matters. The quality of your community matters. I don't care how rural you are. I don't care how urban you are. It still matters starting there. And then when people don't think about or don't know, and one of the things in Get Loud Arkansas is we're trying to be sure we educate people about these local races. Everybody lives in a county all over the state, and we have what amounts to a county legislature. It's called the quorum court, but that's exactly what it is. It's a county legislature. They deal with budgets. They make decisions about all kind of things that will happen in the county. And that's something we really should be paying attention to as much as anything else. And most places, if you're in some kind of town of a certain size, you're going to have a board of directors, city board of directors, or you might call them something else. But there are folks who are determining on a day-to-day basis. And you vote for those directors. You vote for the mayor. you vote for on the quorum court, the county legislature that I was talking about. You vote somebody called justice of the peace. And these things, when you vote, you should think about your life as you don't stay one age all the time. You keep moving up and down that spectrum, or however you want to think about it. Maybe say up because you get getting older and older and older. The same thing is true about all the elections that matter. They move from smaller, and the smaller they are, the more they're going to affect you on a daily basis. They move from smaller all the way up to voting for the president of the United States. And we do it backward. We tend to pay attention to the president of the United States, who is going to be governor, who is going to be our U.S. senators and congresspersons and so forth. That's important. But the things that happen to you on a daily basis are really a big deal that we talk about a lot and try to get people to understand. And I think some of this is just the focus. All of us need to do a better job of focusing on all of the elections, and particularly in the media, where we just tend to talk about those top level things. It's like talking about the top of the tree as if it doesn't have a trunk. All of these smaller elections are the ones that hold up and lead to these big elections we pay attention to. You don't climb the tree to try to see what it's like. You look at it from the bottom up. And the same thing should be true about voting in all of our elections and understanding what they're about.
I wonder about this a lot. It seems like we don't do a very good job in our education system to teach people what the government really does, and at all the different levels in our civics education. And I think that you can kind of see the impact of that when people do choose or not to vote or not to vote, in focusing only on presidential elections and not thinking about the important decisions that are made at different levels of government. I was talking to one justice of the peace in Garland County, and she was talking about a big vote that they had to do in terms of working with a city there to make sure that the health department was funded, because the health department funds in their county came in part from the county itself. And if the county didn't put in their money and the city didn't put in their money, their health department office in the area might close. And that's that would have been a huge devastating issue. But a lot of people don't know about all of these. And for me at Arkansas Advocates, the biggest part of my job as community engagement director is trying to get people to reach out to their legislators about different issues impacting kids. And I hear a lot from people saying, I know how my legislator is going to vote, so there's no point of me reaching out. I know they're going to support what I want them to support, or I know they're going to oppose what I want them to support, so there's no reason. But I tell them it's never a waste of time to speak up for kids. And I think that goes for the ballot box too. All of these levels of government make really important decisions in the well-being of our children. And it's never a waste of time on a Tuesday morning to go to your local voting place and vote for the candidates of your choice, and considering how those decisions will impact children, because, maybe you don't think the government impacts you as much, but it really impacts you and it really impacts children. And those decisions can really have an impact one way or the other for the well-being of our kids.
Mm-hmm. When people say a lot to me, well, I just don't do politics. Well, and I just say back to them, well, then politics will do you, because it's going to happen. You're going to be affected. You just ought to have something to say about it. And one of the other things I think that is such a local thing when it comes to voting, considering, everybody, because, with people who are so traditionally locked out of voting, like anybody with some kind, with some issue of access or disability, just think about what it means. The quorum court will make this decision led by the judge in the county. How many places you will have to vote early, for example, and how many places you're going to have to vote on election day. That is not decided at the Secretary of State's office. That is not decided by the legislature. That is decided at the county level. So if you are in a very rural county for something, for some reason, or if you don't have transportation, and the smaller the population is, and it's also true of larger populations, the less access you're going to have if you need some kind of accommodation. And so what many counties will do, and they say it's to save money, I don't doubt that, but money is not more important than your vote. There is one place in many counties where you to vote early, one place. And then on election day, several counties have reduced the number of places to vote that are easier to access because it's not so far away in a place, and replace them with something called voting centers. Those voting centers tend not to be right on top of each other. They are wide apart. So the place that you might have voted at St. Mark Church for, I don't know, the last 15 years. You might have voted at St. Mark, or you might have, voted at the school that was, right behind your house or whatever. But these places that you've gotten used to are now collapsed into one larger place that may be even further away for you to go, and when you didn't have transportation in the first place. That's a county level decision, just for an example. And everybody knows the example about the mayors, because it's kind of a cliche thing of whether or not your trash gets picked up. And people call me as a state legislator about that. And I get to engage with people so many times because they don't know the proper place to call. So we have a lot of work to do there. That's a great question, I think.
I think that goes right into some of the information that we're wanting to share today. We want to make sure that individuals know exactly who they need to call when they are struggling with something. So if they are having trouble with accessibility of sidewalks in their town or in their city, who would they call? Who do they take that up with? It's not the state legislator, is it?
No, it depends. If it's to a state office, for example, in that county, then the legislature we can be held accountable for that for a state. But in most cases, it's going to be somebody at that local level that needs to be the contact, because no matter who is going to address it, you should go to that local level first, because it can be a mixture of things, like whose building is it, that kind of thing. If I choose to rent my office, for example, to the state, and the state says, here's where you have to go to learn about Social Security or whatever, then the state and that local area, the state will be responsible for. If you put this here, it must be accessible, and you're responsible for making sure so, because you shouldn't place an office somewhere where people don't have access. And when it comes to voting, that is something that should be that the Secretary of State should make sure, clerks are making sure, and then therefore the quorum court, this local legislature, all those people should play a part in making sure that there is access. And so it is just a matter of, when it comes to voting, I would say always start with your county clerk and the Secretary of State, because I just don't understand how we keep getting by without making, for voting especially, making these places accessible. But it continues to happen. And we all know it is not supposed to be that way.
Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families puts out a voter's guide every election year, and we started putting numbers in there that people can call if they're turned away from their polling place. And one of them is Disability Rights Arkansas. We include the number in there because I know in terms of accessibility, but also people with disabilities have gone to vote in Arkansas and been turned away by poll workers. The ACLU also has a voter protection hotline. Their number is 877-523-2792. Two other numbers, Election Protection Coalition Helpline, that's run by a few national groups, including the NAACP. Their number is 866-687-8683. And then if you need help, or someone needs help in Spanish, Arkansas United locally, you can call their number. It's 479-763-2888. 622.
And for everybody who anticipates that you might have a problem, it would be a really good idea if you possibly can vote early, or at least try to vote early, because that gives us some time for there to be a proper response to being turned away or unable to vote. Give some time for us to help you make sure you get your voice heard. So if it's possible, do that. You go anyway on November the 8th, if that's what it is. At the 8th? I have so much stuff in my head. November the 8th, and vote if you don't get to vote early.
So what would you say to a first-time voter or someone that's nervous about voting, or even thinking that their one vote isn't going to matter?
Well, one of the things I like to share with people is that, because I have examples, from the legislature when they say the one vote won't matter. And we have, I don't know, probably 5, I think, or so people now who are serving in that Capitol, who won by, I don't know, I think fewer than 32 votes. There are like 5 or 6 people like that. But there is one person who is absolutely serving in the legislature, who is there by virtue of a single vote. And that's a fact. That person is alive and well. And you might have been the person who did not go to vote, but you really rather have had the opponent. Or you might be the person, hooray to you, who did go vote because you wanted to make sure your voice was heard and that one vote mattered. Everybody who voted for that person can claim it was my vote. And this was after a lot of we had to literally wait for a vote to come in from overseas, where there was a military person or a military family who sent in that one vote that made a difference. So it really does make a difference. And the thing I want people to always remember, it is an easy thing to say, but the result of your not voting can be pretty catastrophic. I don't want to overstate it, but the things that matter to you, every single thing that you'd like to see changed, I guarantee if you have a conversation with me about it, I can show you how it goes back to a vote. If you want better housing, that goes back to a vote. If you want an opportunity to have a better job, or a job at all, that goes back to a vote. If you get down to that local level, if you like your street paved, if you've liked your country road like I, lived on for so long, if you want your road paved, that's a county judge that's going to be doing these kind of things. So all the things that matter to you tend to go back to a vote. And if you don't speak up and say with your vote, this is what I like, I guarantee you somebody else will step into that space. But for me, the biggest triggering thing for me to vote, I pay taxes. Everybody pays taxes. I don't go around just, except for, somebody who is unhoused or whatever and needs, a sandwich. I might say, here's $5 to go buy a sandwich. But you don't go around just handing your money to legislators or people who are in office, no matter where they are. I don't go around just write a check and give them my tax money. But I do give them my tax money in the form of taxation almost every time I buy something. You should not be content to keep handing your money over to people who are going to make all these decisions and you have nothing to say about it. If I jerked money out of your back pocket, I guarantee you would have something to say about it. Why is it any different that you hand your money over to somebody who's making decisions with your money, and your way of telling them how you want them to use your money is through your vote? Don't let somebody pick your pocket and you have nothing to say about it, because that's what's happening to you.
Statistically, for some of those local elections with this lower turnout, each vote is even more significant because so, and like you hit on some of those, your local road pay, like some of those very small day-to-day stuff that you were talking about. I mean, those that hit those local elections, that's a big deal. Every single vote. I mean, it matters in every election, but those locals with the less turnout.
I think another way to look at it is Senator Elliott works for her constituents. They're an employee. She's there to represent them and make sure that she's doing what she needs to do to improve the lives of the people she represents. And so if you don't want to, as she said, do politics, you can consider who you want to hire to represent you at the Capitol and invest your tax dollars for our state. And something else Senator Elliott was talking about that, one vote one way or the other can make all the difference. I mean, at the end of the day, decisions are made by the people who show up. And if you're not showing up for yourself, you probably won't like some of the decisions that are getting made at different levels of government. And so you have to show up for yourself. You have to show up for your children and show up for your community.
I wanted to, something you said earlier, Rebecca, was, about folks who will say, well, it's no point in my calling my legislator, or that's not going to matter. And I always say to people, that's exactly where you go wrong, because you assume it's not going to matter. And guess what? You are assuring that person of, no, you really don't matter, because what they will forever get to say, I never heard from any, and this happens a lot. I never heard from anybody in my district whatsoever. The folks in my district don't want that. And you really, whatever that is. And I have had the experience many, many times. People who will know that whatever the issue is, I'm on their side and I am for this. And I get all these letters asking me to do what I'm already going to do. And the person is not my constituent. Any elected folks should expect to hear from you. When they don't hear from you, that's just assuring them it doesn't matter whether you do what I want you to do or not. And the same folks who are sending me, say, an email about something they know I already agree, and they have another senator, I usually write back whenever I have the time to do it. Thank you for being in touch, but please call your state senator, because that matters. That's an easy way for people to get off being responsible to you. And you keep on paying taxes, and they keep on using your money the way they want to use your money. That's just something you can do something about by just showing up and being insistent,
So there's been a lot of hype over the last couple weeks. September 11th through the 17th was National Disability Voting Rights Week. So a lot of push for that, as well as National Voter Registration Day on September 20th. Mm-hmm. So there has been a lot of social hype. How else can we get involved to get people to register, to get active in voting? What are other ways we can get involved?
I know one way you can get involved with us at Get Loud Arkansas, because we're always looking for volunteers, and you can go to our website. And it's not up yet, but it's going to be soon, so I want you to be looking for it. We've created a simplified way, just a whole. It's not a lot of stuff, but it's a full packet on if you wanted to, right at your church or right in your community or whatever it is, if you wanted to set up a registration opportunity for people. It tells you step by step every single thing you do to get prepared and what you do at the end of it. So we're going to have that up on our website, I think maybe sometime next week at Get Loud Arkansas. You don't have to wait for somebody, and you should not wait for somebody. That thing about I've been waiting for somebody and I figured out that somebody's me. It will give you a step-by-step, and if something you don't understand, you'll have a phone number you can call to make sure you're not waiting for everybody else. But when Get Loud Arkansas, and there are other groups out there doing the same thing, going different places around the state and holding, these events to encourage you to bring people out to vote. Go to events that are regular events that are happening in a place where there's a lot of traffic. You can take registration forms, get out there, and you have to just have the courage to ask people about it. Be nice, and don't preach to people about it. Don't say things to people like, well, I just can't believe you are not registered. Well, if they're not registered, that's not going to make them do it, because as we said earlier, there's no need, and we should not embarrass people or, make them feel as if somehow they are just, poor citizens because they did not. And so, those are some of the things that you can connect to. But those are the kind of things I would suggest. And we've tried to be very intentional about putting together something that was user friendly.
I'd just add, if you can't get to an event or host a session yourself to register people to vote, just text your friends, reach out to your friends and family and see if they're registered to vote. Let them know that the deadline is coming. See if you can help them. They may not have envelopes or stamps, and you can provide those, because unfortunately Arkansas is one of only a few states that don't have online voter registration.
Yes.
But if you can't, go to these community events, just reach out to your own personal community, your own friends and family, and see if you can help them register to vote.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The Arkansas Alliance for Disability Advocacy has been having mock votes around the state of Arkansas, and we have been partnering with a lot of great organizations. These mock votes have anywhere from the local county clerk to the senator or the representative from that district, teaching you exactly how to register to vote, how to change your registration if you're living in a new area, familiar with the individuals that can help you, how to contact the individuals who are actually representing you, all the way down to the point of actually practicing placing your ballot on an accessible polling machine. We all started somewhere, right? We were all unregistered at one point. We all walked up to a ballot box and didn't know how to use it. So what we want to do is we want to break down all insecurities. We want to stop people from being frightened of, and really tell them that it's okay to not know what you don't know. And we want to make them comfortable and make them feel empowered. We let them practice as many times as they need to so they can leave and get excited about voting. So we can register individuals there. We tell them exactly what they need to know about the actually participating in voting, whether it's how to make sure that it's accessible. And if it's not accessible, who they need to call. If they need to actually change that registration, that county clerk is the person that's going to help them out and how to make a personal relationship with them. Your county clerk wants to help you. That's what they're there for.
That's right.
Having Advocacy Takes Action mock votes around the state of Arkansas. And so we're always excited to have new excited voters, and even, our seasoned voters who can actually help others break down all those insecurities about getting to the ballot box.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that we are dealing with is making sure if there's let's just say if it's a Marshallese population, to try to make sure we have our materials or whatever we have reflected in their language. And if you can get somebody to work with, volunteer, those are volunteers we really need a great deal. And we've been lucky to get to find people for sure, who are Spanish speakers. And, but I always think about that, because that to me is like the people who cannot read it no matter what language it's in, or those who just need it in their languages. Those are just things we need to talk about. If somebody, doesn't see very well and they just need you to read something to them, whatever it is, I always just sort of think about folks, okay, what about this? What about this? And the more I interact with people, the more I learn about the inaccessibility. You don't learn it unless you get out there and let yourself be uncomfortable, because imagine how uncomfortable other people are. We have to just do it as well.
And I don't mean to talk about all the laws that I wish there were around this, but there was a bill last General Assembly session that would have required that voting materials be available in plain language, because some of it can be very technical, and things like that would be an easy fix that would make it a lot easier for people to vote, to register to vote, and be part of the process.
And there was also a bill to allow, to make things, speaking of making things easier, to allow people to be able to register, online. And we got into all of this talk once again, kind of like we did with the voter ID, where there was not really a problem, but we're going to make up one to justify what we're doing. And everybody kept talking about, how, that's going to affect the integrity of the vote, or just leaving it open for all kind of, misbehaving because it's online. And it was just so absurd, because I think it's every state except, maybe a handful, something like 8 states. And I think there were states who other states in the country who added themselves, to the whole, added online voter registration during last session. But it's just a small number of states not doing so. And everybody's sitting there. Every single one of us is sitting there with a computer in front of us provided by the state that we put all kind of information on, but we can't let people register by mail. Every one of us rips out that credit card and buys something online. I mean, but you're not as worried about your pocketbook as you are about somebody is going to cheat us out of a vote or something, or somebody is going to register in a way that they're going to pretend they're somebody they're not. But there are measures to get at all of that. There is just no good reason other than we just didn't do it. But yeah, put your money online. But I can't even vote on that. I can't register online. And we're not even asking about voting online. It's just, let me sign up, dude. I mean, no way. Yeah. And that's a real problem. God, I think about what that could mean to people who have challenges in getting, and just simply registering the vote, what that could mean to people.
Yes, absolutely. And I do just want to, just for our listeners' sake, just to remind you, you can always register to vote, but you must be registered to vote at least 30 days before your election. You can find those forms on the Secretary of State's website. I know at DRA we have a link to it as well in different languages. There are so many different places that have the link available to you, but just, yes, get registered to vote.
Yeah, that's a good reminder because, when sometimes people, if we're doing it by hand, we can miss something or whatever. We highlight all the things you absolutely should not miss. But we also have that kind of link on Get Loud Arkansas. But when you're filling out the form, you can fill it out online. But it's like, when you're trying to do something and you miss a space and it says, oh, nope, you can't go any further until you do this. So we have something that you can't mess up. You cannot mess up on that form because it will make you do what you're supposed to do before you can print it. And I love that. But you print it out and then all you have to do is sign it and get it into the Secretary of State or your local clerk. But things like that should be easy to vote. I lived in Minnesota 1 year, and when they told me that I didn't have to bother with registering before the election, I didn't believe them. They said, "Oh, you don't have to do that. Just register when you go to vote." I go like, "No, I'm from Arkansas." I'm thinking, no, it's 30 days or something. What's the number of days that I have to be registered before? And the person kept repeating it to me. I just did not believe it. I didn't. I thought it was some trick to keep this Arkansan from voting in Minnesota. And I said, well, okay. It was a person I trusted. And I went to the polls that day. I can imagine a person going for the first time. I had such anxiety about going because I was so afraid I was going to be turned away and somebody was going to say, my God, you're a school teacher. You didn't have enough sense to know that you were supposed to register. That's just what I felt. And I got there and I was gone probably in 10 minutes. I mean, registered and gone in about 10 minutes because there was not a long line. So I was just amazed. And I thought, why don't we have this one? But that's another one of those things.
I think this has been a very productive conversation for our listeners, not only to remind them to get registered, but to really understand the impact of voting every single time they get a chance. And I think we want to throw out a couple of fastball questions for you, a little rapid fire with Lainey and Allie. So, Joyce, I want to ask you about voter purging, what that is, why people need to be aware of that, and what we need to know to make sure that we can stay on the registration list.
If you don't vote like in two major election cycles, like at two major election cycles, as in like for the president, there is a federal law that requires maintenance the voter rolls. And maintenance means that for some counties, it's done differently. Say in my county, maybe my clerk says you haven't voted in whatever the amount of time. And I will get like a white card. In my case, I know in the mail saying that you haven't voted, you're being removed from the rolls. And what that means is you could show up thinking you're registered to vote and you're not. So number one, I suggest everybody check, especially if you've not voted in some time and you don't know when the last time you voted. You need to check to see if you are on the roll. And I know there's a place that probably at several websites, but there is a Get Loud Arkansas. You can put your information in. It'll tell you whether or not you are official. Some people never know that they've been purged from the rolls. Get Loud Arkansas, with purging, we've identified 104,000 people that have been removed from the rolls. We had a press release out about it yesterday, and it's out there, and people are now learning about you may be purged. Go check. And the other thing people need to really look at, if you have changed your name, for example, we've done a lot of work with the LGBTQI community, because some people may be transitioning, they might have changed their names or whatever. It's not just because you got married or you got a divorce. If you have changed anything about your registration, your name, your address, or whatever, there is a place on the registration form where you just fill out that part, not the whole re-registering. But if you've changed your address, any of that, you need to be sure you pay attention to that, because that will have the same effect of having been removed, because you won't be able to vote.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know that's very important. So remember, go to Get Loud Arkansas's webpage to check on that. You can go to voterview.com, or even call your county clerk. Make sure that you are ready to vote. Make sure that you're still registered. Make sure that you have everything that you need before you go to that ballot box.
So we talked about the impact of some of the local elections. Voting in each one is important. What about, say, the justice of the peace? What does your vote for the justice of the peace impact? Like, what decisions are they making that impact your daily life?
Remember when we talked about these local races, and there was something called the quorum court? That's like your county legislature. It's just called the quorum court. Like I serve at the Capitol. I'm called a senator, the person who serves your area, and everybody has a justice of the peace. So the key impact of that justice of the peace, a lot of people tend to think, oh, they just marry people. Well, they can, but that's not their major function. Where you get to vote on election day will be determined, and how many voting places you have will be determined by your quorum court. Whether or not that road that gravel road, a road that should be gravel, but it's really just mud, that goes by your church, and every Sunday your car is a mess because you had to drive on that same road. Whether or not school buses have access to good roads to take kids to school and not get stuck in the mud. These are literal things that happen, because your justices of the peace will have to make decisions about those county roads. Not the state roads so much, but the county roads. Whether or not your justices of the peace pair up with the legislature or somebody else, so you can have good drinking water. All these things matters. Whether or not your county has access to some of the funds that come from the state, that depends on, because there are things that quorum courts have to do with the state in order to get money coming back to the county. If they're not doing that, things just pass you by. Whether or not your library is going to be open, whether or not because that's generally that's a county function. How many hours it's going to be open? Are we going to pay people in that library so that you can get good services? And whether or not we are going to allow our libraries to be used for so much of what's going on right now, where people are trying to ban books and everything. I mean, it's all those things are really important to you locally. That is what your county legislature called the quorum court, and the people who serve you called the justices of the peace. That's part of what they're all about. And I probably just touched the surface. And the biggest one of all I left out when I talked about taxes earlier. You pay taxes, in your county. Every time you, those taxes that money is decided how it's going to be spent. Even money they get from the state, how it's going to be spent depends on who you put in those seats.
Rebecca, what do you guys have going on that can really educate individuals on what's going on? I know you all usually have a guide that everyone can refer back to. What do you have going on?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for people to educate themselves as much as they can before they go to vote about the issues and candidates that are running for office. Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, we don't endorse or oppose any candidates or political parties. But we do put out a voter's guide every election year that gives overviews of important issues impacting kids and families and gives some sample questions for the candidates to get their views on issues impacting children. And I really encourage people to go to, if they can, to events that have candidates speaking on different issues, ask them questions to get their point of views. You can view our voter's guide at aradvocates.org. And then under the advocacy tab, you can link to our voter's guide. And that also has those hotline numbers that you can call if you're turned away from the polls. But also one good piece of legislation that passed last year required that everyone in Arkansas should be able to view their sample ballot online. So you can go on Arkansas Voter View and see your ballot ahead of time and see all the different candidate races.
I do have one more question. I don't know if you have any other ones, Allie. This goes back to.
I do want to make sure that our listeners know the first thing that they have to do is speak up for themselves. They have to use their voice. They run into a problem. We need to make sure that they own their power and they say something about it right then. Don't miss out on a chance to cast your ballot. Don't miss out on a chance to register, whatever, wherever you are at in your process. If you don't speak up about the issues that you're facing, the barriers that you're facing, then no one is going to know about that. We want you to practice self-determination. We want you to practice your self-advocacy. We want you to take a stand and say, this is a barrier to me. I'm not able to do this because this is causing me this issue. And so whether you then talk to a poll worker, whether you then call your county clerk, whether you then call Disability Rights Arkansas, whatever your next step is in that process, you first have to use your power and you practice that self-advocacy because no one is going to be there to help you because they might not know that you are actually facing the barrier.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This radio broadcast will also be published on our website alongside the show notes with any links or resources mentioned in today's show. Make sure you check it out. Thank you for listening, and remember to speak up, Arkansas.